You ever sit across from your own sister in a courtroom and feel like a stranger walked in wearing her face? Because that's exactly how it felt that Tuesday morning in Philadelphia. Spring outside, cold as January inside. The windows of the courthouse were tinted with a kind of gray that made you feel like the light was being filtered through a memory. It was the kind of day where nothing should have surprised me anymore. And yet, the sight of Jessica, my sister, my childhood best friend, my maid of honor, standing before a federal bankruptcy judge, accusing me of being financially reckless and emotionally unstable, managed to carve out a new hole in my chest. My name is Claire Whitmore. I was 34 years old the day my sister burned my life down in the cleanest, most professional, most legal way imaginable. Now, I won't lie to you and say I was in great shape before that moment. I wasn't. My wedding planning business in Chicago had collapsed faster than I ever thought possible. Thanks to the pandemic, 4 weddings disappeared from my calendar in 1 week. Refunds, deposits, cancellations, it was a financial bloodbath. I'd built that company from scratch. Claire Whitmore Weddings had graced the pages of Modern Bride twice. By the time I closed the doors on the boutique office in the Loop, I had just enough money left for a U-Haul, a tearful goodbye to my business partner, and a one-way trip back to the city where it all began. Philadelphia wasn't home anymore, but it was familiar. I moved into a small guest room in Jessica's 4-bedroom colonial in Chestnut Hill. I told myself it was temporary. I'd regroup, take a breath, and figure out my next move. Jessica offered to help with my finances to stabilize the chaos, she said. She had a law degree, a structured mind, and an impressive way of making things happen. Growing up, I'd envied how she always had a spreadsheet for everything, from family vacations to which boys she was willing to date. She made competence look easy. When she suggested taking over my accounts temporarily, it didn't even feel like a question. Just until you get your footing, she said. Let me sort through the mess. You don't need to carry all this. And like a fool, I said yes. That was my second biggest mistake. The first, believing blood was a bond that could survive ambition. Within 6 months, Jessica had quietly taken control of everything, my bank accounts, my LLC registration, even my car title. She sold my last remaining assets under my name, a few antique furnishings I had inherited from our grandmother, my mother's sapphire necklace, and my company's backup camera equipment. She did it all with a notary and a smile. And when I asked questions, she would answer me like I was a difficult child asking where the cookies went. You need a clean slate, Claire, she said over breakfast one morning, casually sipping her latte like she hadn't just liquidated half my existence the week before. You can't keep chasing after a business that's already failed. The word stung. But worse was the way she made it sound like mercy. And then came the bombshell. She filed a petition to declare me legally bankrupt, using the paperwork she had gathered while managing my affairs. When I asked why she would do such a thing, she looked at me like I'd gone mad. I'm protecting you, she said. You're not thinking clearly, and someone has to step in before you destroy what little you have left. What little I had left. That was rich, coming from someone who drove a leased Jaguar and had 3 different espresso machines for her kitchen. I tried to fight it. I hired a lawyer with the last $3,000 I had from a college friend who owed me a favor. But the damage was already done. Jessica had prepped every document, cited every debt, and carefully shaped the narrative of my incompetence. She painted me as emotionally unfit, a woman clinging to a failed dream. She even brought up the panic attacks I had after my last big cancellation in 2020. She told the judge I needed financial intervention. She said it with a hand on her heart. The bankruptcy was granted. Just like that, my credit was obliterated. My accounts frozen. My business history flattened into a 1-page summary of failures. When I walked out of that courtroom, I had $31 in my checking account and a cold metal taste in my mouth from how hard I'd bitten my tongue to keep from screaming. Jessica hugged me at the exit like she'd just visited me in the hospital. You'll thank me for this one day, she whispered. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. The truth is, I didn't even cry. Not once. I walked back to the studio apartment I was renting month to month in South Philly and sat on the edge of the creaky futon mattress, staring at the blank wall in front of me. I stayed there for hours, motionless, not blinking, not moving, barely breathing. And then, quietly, I got up. Because something inside me, something that hadn't stirred in years, woke up. I wasn't done. I wasn't dead. And I wasn't going to let Jessica Whitmore be the narrator of my story. The thing about being stripped of everything, money, reputation, pride, is that you stop caring about the rules other people wrote. You start asking yourself what's left to lose. And when the answer is nothing, that's when you become dangerous. In that silence, in that broken little apartment with no art on the walls and a fridge that buzzed too loudly at night, I started to plan. Not revenge. Not destruction. Reinvention. If Jessica wanted to declare me bankrupt, fine. Let the world believe I was done. But I was already rewriting the next chapter. And this time it would be mine, word for word. 3 months after my sister declared me bankrupt, I was living in a garage. Not the kind with oil stains and spiders, mind you. It was the converted upstairs space of a retired librarian named Mrs. Gleason in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It had a sloped ceiling, peeling floral wallpaper, and a tiny kitchenette that smelled faintly of cinnamon and mildew. Rent was $740 a month, which I paid in cash, collected from 2 jobs that most people would consider beneath them. But after losing everything, there's a kind of freedom in the humility. The rules no longer apply when the game has already spit you out. In the mornings, I delivered flowers for a boutique called Lavender and Bone, an old money shop in Boston's South End that specialized in $300 sympathy arrangements and bespoke funeral wreaths. The owner, Janice, had no idea I used to run one of the top wedding planning businesses in Chicago. To her, I was Claire Monroe, quiet, punctual, and good at keeping dahlias alive in transit. That was enough. At night, I cleaned high-end Airbnb rentals. Old brownstones in Beacon Hill, sleek penthouses in the Seaport District, the kind of places where someone's toothbrush probably cost more than my month's groceries. I scrubbed soap scum from clawfoot tubs, restocked lavender sachets in linen drawers, and organized shelves of champagne flutes I couldn't afford to breathe near, let alone own. It was hard, yes, but it also taught me something. I started to listen. Not just to people, but to the houses. There's something about touching the private parts of a stranger's home. The dust behind their headboard, the smudges on their mirror, the coffee stains on marble countertops, that makes you feel like you've time-traveled into the lives they're pretending to live. And during those hours alone, I began to remember what ambition felt like. It had been dormant, not dead. One night, while cleaning a townhouse on Chestnut Street, 3 stories, full library, velvet armchairs I would have killed for, I stopped to catch my breath and drink a bottle of cucumber water from the guest fridge. That's when I pulled out my phone, just for a second, and opened Zillow. It had become a quiet habit. Not to buy, obviously, I had barely enough for a tank of gas, but to imagine. I was a broke woman scrolling $1,000,000 listings at midnight while holding a mop. And then I saw it. A listing in Vermont. Not some generic McMansion or minimalist box, but the house. 5-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Hill, fully restored, $449,000. I sat down on the polished marble floor, heart racing. I knew that house. Jessica used to talk about it non-stop. She'd clipped photos of its pillared porch from Architectural Digest, pinned it to her Pinterest boards titled, My Future Life, and once told me, half drunk on Chardonnay at our cousin's wedding, that it was where my perfect life will finally begin. That white colonial wasn't just a house. It was her altar, her dream, and it was for sale. I stared at the screen for a long time. The listing had everything she'd ever said she wanted. Original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, wood-burning fireplaces in every room, and that ridiculous but charming red front door. My stomach flipped. The number $449,000 may as well have been $4 million in that moment. I didn't have a savings account, a credit score, or even a debit card with more than 2 digits on it. But I had something Jessica never would. Loyalty. A decade in the wedding industry gave me more than memories and invoices. It gave me relationships. Quiet favors. People whose lives I saved on the most stressful days of their lives. One of them was Hunter Blake, a real estate investor in Atlanta whose daughter's entire wedding venue caught fire the night before her big day. I found them a new space, arranged new rentals, and even had backup floral centerpieces delivered in 6 hours. The wedding went on. Hunter never forgot. I called him the next morning, my fingers trembling with both shame and adrenaline. I told him the truth, almost all of it. "Claire Whitmore," he said when he picked up, his southern drawl still syrupy after all these years. "You're calling me for the first time in 6 years. Must be something serious." "It is," I said. "I need to buy a house." There was a pause. Then laughter. "I assume you're not calling to buy my beach property on Tybee Island?" "No," I said. "It's in Vermont. It's complicated. But I'm asking for a favor. A real one." I explained the situation as best I could without unraveling completely. I told him I wanted to pay him back in 2 years, maybe less. No banks. No co-signers. Just me, the house, and a desperate sort of resolve that didn't let me sleep anymore. He didn't even ask for more details. "Claire, I'll wire $500,000 by Friday," he said, like he was offering me a ride to the grocery store. "You flip it, rent it, live in it. Whatever you want. I trust you." I nearly dropped the phone. That Friday morning, the title to 12 Sycamore Hill was transferred to Maine. Cash purchase. No mortgage. No liens. No one to question how a woman with zero credit and a trail of bankruptcy paperwork managed to secure a 5-bedroom colonial in the hills of Vermont. The house was mine. Mine. I took a train north that weekend and stood alone in the gravel driveway, the keys biting into my palm like they couldn't believe it either. The porch swing creaked softly in the wind. The shutters were dark green, just like Jessica had always described them. And when I walked into the foyer, the real, breathing, sunlit foyer, I could feel my chest tighten with something that wasn't sadness or rage. It was satisfaction. Quiet and heavy. Later that night, I logged onto Facebook through a dummy account and saw a new post on Jessica's timeline. It was a photo of Sycamore Hill. "My Sycamore Hill. One day," the caption read. I stared at her words, then at the deed in my lap, and whispered, "One day is today." She had no idea. Not yet. Owning the house was one thing. Living in it, quietly, invisibly, deliberately, was another. I moved into 12 Sycamore Hill under my mother's maiden name, Claire Monroe. The mailbox still read Harrington, left over from the previous owners, and I let it be. No one in town had to know the truth, and I didn't offer it. I became a ghost with skin, shopping with cash, keeping to myself, inventing a simple story that no one bothered to question. A reclusive writer from New York, fresh off a divorce, looking for peace in the mountains. It wasn't even much of a lie. I'd lost something deeper than a husband. I'd lost my name, my business, my sense of dignity, burned to ash under the weight of betrayal. But here, nestled in the pines above a sleepy Vermont town, I had anonymity and acres of quiet. More than I could have hoped for after what Jessica did to me. She was still in Philadelphia, of course, climbing social ladders and curating perfection like it was a full-time job. We hadn't spoken since the day of the court hearing. She probably thought I was still drifting somewhere, broken, trying to pick up the pieces. I never corrected her. She didn't know I'd found a job with a local florist in Montpelier to cover the basics. She didn't know I was slowly rebuilding my savings with side gigs, teaching online classes in floral design under a pseudonym, consulting brides in secret from a locked Instagram account. She had no idea that every spare dollar was going back into her dream house. Because this house, this beautiful, aching, old soul of a structure, deserved more than wallpaper dreams and Pinterest boards. It deserved hands that would restore, not possess. And I gave it everything. The first thing I replaced were the pipes, antiquated copper barely hanging on after 100 years of Vermont winters. Then came the roof, then the windows. I paid in cash, often in deposits spaced out over weeks. No credit, no financing. Just pure, honest labor and slow patience. The kitchen was my favorite. Hand-cut Italian tiles laid one by one, each chosen like a prayer. I imported marble countertops from a quarry in Carrara, soft gray veins running like frozen smoke through pure white stone. It cost me $19,400. I paid it in full. I didn't eat out for 2 months after that, but I didn't care. Every time I ran my hands across that polished marble, I felt like I was reclaiming a little piece of myself. There was no rage in the work, no revenge. Only resurrection. I painted the upstairs guest rooms in gentle tones: sage, cream, soft navy. I replaced cracked banisters and polished brass knobs with lemon oil and late-night podcasts humming in my earbuds. I found a local artisan to restore the stained glass windows. I replanted the garden with lavender, lilac, and peonies, just like the ones my mother used to grow. In time, the house stopped creaking like it was grieving. It exhaled. For the first time in years, I stopped thinking about Jessica. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped waiting for her next move. And then, on a warm Sunday morning in April, she came. I was kneeling in the backyard, dirt beneath my nails, the sun rising behind the pines like a soft hallelujah. I'd just finished planting a row of English lavender along the stone path. My hands were still gloved when I heard it, a low crunch of tires on gravel, slow and hesitant. I straightened, squinting toward the driveway. A white Range Rover. Even before the door opened, I knew. There was a sick twist in my gut, like a string being pulled too tight. Jessica stepped out like a mirage. Sunglasses, expensive boots, a silk blouse that probably cost more than my washer-dryer combo. She looked thinner than I remembered, sharper, like life had been sanding her down. But still perfectly put together. She stood at the edge of the property for a moment, as if the place might bite her. Then she stepped forward and took the porch step slowly, reverently, like she was approaching a shrine. I didn't move. She hadn't noticed me yet, crouched by the flowers, hat pulled low, skin tanned from weeks of outdoor labor. She turned to me. Her eyes scanned my face briefly, but there was no recognition. That stung more than I expected. "I've loved this house for years," she said, shading her eyes from the sun. "Do you know who owns it now?" I stood up fully, brushing soil from my gloves. I let the silence stretch, just enough. "No," I said. "But I hear she's not for sale." She laughed, a brittle, practiced sound. "That's a shame. It's everything I imagined it would be." I tilted my head slightly. Some dreams are meant to stay dreams. She squinted at me, puzzled, then smiled politely and turned back toward her car. I stood there long after she left, the breeze rustling the willow tree like a whisper. That night, I pulled up her Facebook. She'd posted a story, just a photo of the front gate. The caption read, "My future home, one day." But that day had already come and gone. And the house? It was no longer hers to dream about. It was mine. Mine to rebuild. Mine to breathe life into. Mine to protect from anyone who only ever wanted it as a symbol of status. And deep down, I knew she would be back. Because people like Jessica always come back to what they think they deserve. After that Sunday morning when Jessica first showed up on my doorstep, unknowing, curious, and still blind to who I really was, something shifted in the air around Sycamore Hill. She didn't just visit once. She came back. At first it was once a week, then twice. Sometimes she'd walk the perimeter of the house like a realtor memorizing property lines. Other times, she'd park across the road and sit in her SUV, eyes fixed on the porch as if her sheer longing could unlock the front door. Once, I watched her from the parlor window as she pressed her palm against the wrought iron gate. She stood there for a long while, like someone visiting a grave, not just of a house, but of a version of her life that had died quietly while no one was watching. She still didn't know I lived here. Still didn't realize that the woman restoring the rose garden and repainting the shutters was the same sister she'd declared bankrupt just a year before. It would have been easy to gloat, to walk out onto the porch, wave the deed in her face, and say, "Remember me?" But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt curious. Hollowed out by the silence between us, yes, but also deeply curious. What kind of woman destroys her sister's financial life, claims it's for her own good, and then obsesses over a house she assumes belongs to someone else. It didn't take long to find out. One afternoon, while I was picking up supplies in town, I ran into a lawyer I knew, someone I'd worked with years ago during my wedding planning days. We got to chatting, and somewhere between, "How have you been?" and "What brought you up to Vermont?" he mentioned that he'd seen Jessica's name on a foreclosure watch list. 3 properties, he said, sipping his coffee. Marketing firm, primary residence, and an investment condo in Hoboken. All headed to auction. My heart didn't sink. It didn't rise either. It just stilled. The Range Rover, the tailored blazers, the expensive boots, smoke and mirrors. Jessica's life had been collapsing quietly behind the curtain, just like mine had a year ago. But instead of asking for help, she'd doubled down on the illusion of control. She tried to outrun failure the way she always had, by pretending it wasn't real. The difference was when my world collapsed, I started over. She kept pretending. I drove straight home, pulled out the paperwork Hunter had sent me, and did something I hadn't planned to do for years. I registered Sycamore Hill for a public event. Not just any event, a charity home tour hosted by the Vermont Historical Homes Society. It was well publicized, well attended, and impossible to ignore if you had even a passing interest in New England architecture or local prestige. I registered the house under my real name, Claire Whitmore. I made sure the name tag was bold. I made sure the event hit the local real estate blogs and social pages. I even emailed a few former clients who were still active on the East Coast social circuit. Within a week, my inbox was full of RSVP confirmations, and so was the street in front of the house. Jessica showed up right on time. I saw her the moment she stepped out of the Range Rover. She wore a green silk dress and heels too high for the gravel walkway. Her smile was the same one she'd used for school photos, job interviews, and first dates, perfectly practiced and completely hollow. But then she saw the sign at the entry gate. And then the name tag. She froze. Her lips moved before her feet did. "Claire?" she said, stepping forward, eyes wide, voice caught somewhere between disbelief and disbelief's older, meaner sister. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. "I live here," I said. Then, after a breath, "I own it." It was the first time we'd looked each other in the eyes in over a year. The first time she saw me not as someone broken or pitted or beneath her, but as someone whole. I watched her eyes drift over the porch columns, the newly restored shutters, the fresh paint on the front door, the blooming wisteria winding around the banister. I saw the moment it hit her that this house, her dream, was no longer a fantasy sitting on a Pinterest board. It was real, and it belonged to me. She stood there for a moment, stunned silent by the weight of the truth. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "For what I did. For all of it." I nodded. That was all I gave her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But acknowledgement. A small, quiet nod. 6 months passed. In that time, Sycamore Hill continued to heal, and so did I. I rented out 2 rooms through Airbnb. Guests came and went, drawn to the charm, the garden, the history. I began teaching floral design at the community college in town. I wrote again under my real name. Nothing grand, just essays, blog posts, a few guest pieces in small lifestyle magazines. But it felt like breathing again. The mortgage was nearly gone. Just $43,200 left, and falling every month. Jessica moved to a smaller place in Albany. We text sometimes. Nothing deep. Weather, new recipes, the occasional memory from our childhood that neither of us wants to say out loud, but both of us still carry. There's a quiet, cautious civility between us now. But sometimes, when she hesitates mid-sentence or stares a little too long at a photo I send of the front porch in autumn or the willow tree dusted with snow, I know what she's really thinking. How did she do it? How did the woman she bankrupted, erased on paper and in name, rise from the ashes and build something even stronger? And the answer is simple. I didn't fight fire with fire. I didn't match cruelty with cruelty. I fought it with wood and stone and soil, with silence, with dignity, with my own 2 hands. I didn't just buy her dream house. I made it mine. I made it a home. And every morning I wake up in this house, my house, I don't feel victorious. I feel free.